door to room 14 was the wrong color. Dolores Pratt noticed it before she noticed anything else. She had been gone 4 days, staying with her sister in Covington, while the doctors ran tests on Miriam's heart. And when the taxi dropped her at the Sycamore Arms at 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, the door to her apartment was not the faded ivory it had always been. It was gray, industrial gray, the kind of color that said municipal, said temporary, said nobody lives here. She tried her key. It did not fit. She tried it again, slower, the way she always did when her hands were cold, but the lock barrel did not move. The key went in only halfway, and then stopped, meeting resistance that had never been there before. Dolores stood in the corridor of the building she had lived in for 19 years, the building where she had come home to after her husband Gerald's funeral, where she had learned to cook for one, where she had painted the interior of her front door a soft green, because the super had never cared what color you did the inside, and she understood in the space of one quiet heartbeat that something had been done to her. She sat down on the hallway bench outside the laundry room and waited, because she did not know what else to do. If you have ever watched someone realize they have been erased from their own life, you know that moment is quieter than anyone expects. Stay with the story. And if it moves you, take a moment to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and watch until the very end. Garrison Mack had been in Harlan County for 11 days, which was 10 more than he had planned. He was 37 years old, 6 feet 2 inches, 210 pounds of lean muscle that moved with a compact economy the Marines had built into him over 14 years. His hair was dark and cut tight to the skull, shot through at the temples with early gray he had not earned through age alone. His face was angular and unsparing, with a wide jaw and a nose that had been broken once in a training accident and healed slightly to the left. His eyes were the color of creek water over gray stone, and they moved the way eyes move when the part of the brain behind them never fully switches off. A faint scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye toward his ear, thin as a paper cut, white against weathered skin. He wore a worn olive field jacket over a dark flannel shirt, jeans, and laced boots with mud on the soles from a road that had not dried since last Wednesday. Beside him, never more than 18 inches away, walked Cato. Cato was a German shepherd, 4 years old, working line and built like one, around 78 pounds of bone and focused muscle. His coat was a deep sable, black through the shoulders and saddle, with rust brown on his legs and chest and muzzle, and a paler undercoat that caught the light when he moved. His ears stood full and erect, angled like 2 satellite dishes that could not stop receiving. A small scar notched the base of his left ear, a relic of a training exercise in the Mojave that neither he nor Garrison had forgotten. He wore no vest, only a wide, dark leather collar with a single brass ring, worn smooth from years of being held. His eyes were deep amber, and they moved with the same quality as Garrison's, cataloging everything, discarding nothing. Garrison had come to Harlan County to help a former staff sergeant named Doyle move a load of salvaged lumber from a barn demolition. Doyle's truck had blown a head gasket on the second day. The lumber was still in the barn. Garrison, having nowhere in particular to be, and no schedule that anyone was depending on, had stayed to help Doyle find a mechanic willing to make a house call in mud season. He was walking back from the gas station at the far end of Drummond Street when he passed the Sycamore Arms and saw the old woman on the bench. Cato stopped first. He did not growl or tense. He simply stopped, one paw lifted slightly, and looked at the woman with the steady attention he gave to things he had decided mattered. Garrison stopped with him, the way he always stopped when Cato stopped, and he looked where the dog was looking. The woman was small and thin, in her 80s, with the white hair pinned back carefully, and a dark coat that was good quality but old. She held a key ring in both hands in her lap and was looking at a door at the end of the hall, the way a person looks at something that has contradicted them. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry. She had the controlled stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago that certain feelings were best not expressed in hallways. Garrison turned to go. He took 2 steps. Then he stopped again and looked back. Cato had not moved. "Ma'am," Garrison said from the doorway. He said it quietly, the way he had learned to speak in rooms where someone had just received difficult news. The woman looked up. "I live here," she said, not defensively. Just as a fact she felt the need to establish. "What happened to your key?" "They changed the lock." She said it simply. "I was away 4 days. I came back, and they changed the lock." Garrison stepped inside the building. Cato came with him, close, reading the corridor the way he read every new space. Her name was Dolores Pratt. She had moved into apartment 14 at the Sycamore Arms in the spring of 19 years prior, when the rent was $462 a month, and the landlord was a man named Howard Kessel, who lived in the building and fixed things with his own hands. Howard Kessel had died 4 years ago, and the building had been sold twice since then. The current owner was a company called Meridian Property Group, which had an address in a city 2 states away and communicated through a property manager named Garth Lyle, who drove a silver sedan and wore shoes that were not right for the weather. Dolores paid her rent by money order on the 1st of every month and had not missed a payment in 19 years. She told Garrison this in the lobby, standing, because the bench had been uncomfortable and she was not the kind of woman who complained about benches. She told him without agitation, with the precision of someone who understood that the facts were what mattered now. Garrison listened the way he had listened to briefings, drawing out the sequence, the dates, the names. Cato sat beside him, facing the locked door, ears up. "Do you have a copy of your lease?" Garrison asked. "Upstairs," she said, then caught herself. "In there." She gestured toward door 14. "Anywhere else?" She thought for a moment. "Gerald kept files. We kept everything doubled. I put copies in the closet of the 2nd bedroom. There's a gray box." She paused. "But the door?" "We'll get in," Garrison said. He said it plainly, without performance, the way he might have said the weather is going to clear. The building manager arrived 40 minutes later, which was how long it had taken Garrison to call the number on the management company's placard in the lobby and explain in measured, neutral terms that a tenant had been locked out of her unit of 19 years and required access immediately. The voice on the phone had asked him to hold several times and then said someone would be out before the end of business hours. Business hours, the voice clarified, ended at 5. It was 2:40 in the afternoon. The manager who arrived was not Garth Lyle. He was a younger man named Brent, early 20s, with a ring of master keys and the expression of someone who had been given a job he had not fully understood when he accepted it. He explained, looking past Dolores rather than at her, that the unit had been rekeyed because the property management company had received no response to 3 notices and the tenant had been considered to have vacated. "I was at my sister's for 4 days, Dolores said. "There were notices sent," Brent said. "To what address?" Garrison asked. Brent looked at him for the first time. "The address on file." "Which is?" Brent checked his phone. He said the address. It was the address of the Sycamore Arms. 14 Drummond Street, apartment 14. "So you sent notices to her apartment," Garrison said, notifying her that she had vacated her apartment. Brent did not answer immediately. Cato was watching him the way Cato watched certain people, with a stillness that was different from his neutral stillness and that Garrison had learned to take seriously. "She needs access to her unit," Garrison said. "She has not vacated. She's standing here. She has a copy of her current lease and 19 years of payment records inside. You're going to open that door." Brent opened the door. The apartment was intact. Whatever Meridian Property Group had planned, they had not yet moved her belongings. The room smelled of the lavender sachets she kept in the linen closet, and the slightly sweet dust of old books. Dolores stood in the doorway for a moment and breathed, and Garrison looked away to give her the space to do it. The gray file box was in the second bedroom closet, exactly where she said it would be, on the top shelf under a blue and white quilt. Garrison lifted it down and set it on the kitchen table. The lease was there. It was a full document, 31 pages, executed 14 years ago when Howard Kessel had done a formal renewal after an earlier verbal arrangement. Dolores's signature was on every page and Howard Kessel's, and the signatures had been notarized. Garrison sat at the table and read it, from the front page to the last, with the methodical patience he applied to any document that was going to matter later. Cato lay on the kitchen floor near Dolores's feet while she made tea. He did not ask for anything. He simply lay there, in contact with the base of her chair, a warmth she did not ask for but did not move away from either. The lease contained, in Section 11, Paragraph 3, a clause that stated the tenant could not be removed from the premises without 60 days written notice, delivered in person or by certified mail with return receipt, and that any lockout prior to the completion of formal eviction proceedings, as defined by state statute, constituted a material breach of the lease agreement by the landlord. There had been no certified mail. Dolores had not signed any return receipt. The notices, if they existed at all, had not been delivered in person. "They didn't follow their own contract," Garrison said. Dolores set a cup of tea in front of him. It was chamomile. He drank it. "No," she said. "They did not." He asked her if she knew anyone at the county courthouse. She thought for a moment and said she knew Phyllis Odom, who had worked at the county clerk's office for 30 years and whose husband had gone to school with Gerald. "Call Phyllis," Garrison said. "First thing tomorrow." He stayed that evening until Dolores had changed the chain lock on the inside of the door, a hardware store improvement that cost $7.19 and required only a screwdriver and 4 minutes of work. He installed it himself. The door now could not be opened from the outside while the chain was engaged, which meant it could not be rekeyed on her again without her cooperation. He also photographed the lease, all 31 pages, with his phone, and sent the images to his own email address. She asked him, as he was leaving, why he had stopped. He glanced back at Cato, who was sitting in the doorway of the kitchen, watching them both. "He did," Garrison said. Dolores looked at Cato for a long moment. Cato looked back at her with his amber eyes and his ears up, and the left ear with the notch turned slightly toward her. "Well," she said, "thank him for me." Garrison Mack did not consider himself to be staying in Harlan County. He considered himself to be helping Doyle with a mechanical problem that had not yet resolved, and in the meanwhile, checking in on a neighbor situation that had not yet concluded. These were two different things from staying. He told himself this while he helped Doyle reinstall the truck's coolant lines on Thursday morning, and he told himself this on Friday afternoon when he drove Dolores to the county clerk's office to speak with Phyllis Odom, and he told it to himself again on Saturday when Phyllis called back with a name. The name was Owen Tate. Owen Tate was a housing attorney who volunteered 2 days a week at the Harlan County Legal Aid Office and who had handled 3 cases against Meridian Property Group in the past 2 years. 2 of those cases had settled in the tenant's favor. Owen was 56 years old, lean and unhurried, with a brown beard going to silver, and reading glasses he wore around his neck on a plain cord. He drove a 10-year-old pickup and wore the same kind of boots Garrison wore, and he shook Garrison's hand in the parking lot of the legal aid office with the brief, firm grip of someone who did not need to establish anything with handshakes. "She's been there 19 years, Owen said. 19 years. No missed payments. Original lease? Notarized? Clause 11, paragraph 3 is clear." Owen nodded. He was already reading the photographs on Garrison's phone, scrolling with one thumb, his jaw tight. "They've done this before," Owen said. "Not always this building. Meridian gets a property. They let the management drag. They stop maintaining things. They send notices to addresses they know won't receive them. They rekey. They cite abandonment. Then they come in and do a full unit renovation and raise the rent 100% on whatever market the property is in." "And the tenant has no recourse?" Garrison asked. "The tenant has every recourse. Most of them just don't know it, and they don't have anyone to help them read the lease." Owen handed the phone back. "Your lady has documentation going back 14 years. She has a notarized contract with a provision they ignored completely. What she also has," he said, squinting into the pale November light, "is a wrongful lockout under state statute, which carries actual damages plus attorney's fees. And if Meridian tries to pursue eviction after a wrongful lockout, a judge is going to want to know why." Cato was sitting in the bed of Doyle's borrowed truck in the parking lot, watching a crow on a telephone wire with professional attention. "What does she need to do?" Garrison asked. "Come in Monday," Owen said. "Bring the lease. Bring the money orders." "She saved all of them?" Owen looked at him. "Did she?" Garrison thought about the gray file box, the blue and white quilt on the top shelf, the way Dolores kept everything doubled because Gerald had taught her to. "She did," Garrison said. On Saturday evening, Garrison ate dinner with Doyle at the diner on the corner of Maple and 3rd, which was called Hester's, and which served, in Garrison's estimation, the best bowl of white bean soup in the state, along with cornbread that arrived in a cast-iron skillet, still warm enough to melt butter without effort. Doyle was 53, broad and slow-moving, with a gray beard and a way of listening to stories that made you feel the story was being treated with respect. He had driven supply convoys in Anbar and lost 2 friends there, and never once talked about it except sideways, in the way men of a certain generation and training talked about things sideways. "You read her lease," Doyle said. "I did. The whole thing. 31 pages. Doyle broke a piece of cornbread. "You've been here almost 2 weeks. The truck's not fixed." "Truck got fixed this morning." Doyle looked at him across the table. No accusation in it. Just information, set down plainly. "It's running fine. I drove it to the mechanic myself." Garrison looked at his soup. "I'm not asking you to go," Doyle said. "Just noting the truck is fixed." Cato was under the table with his nose on Garrison's boot. When Garrison reached down to put his hand on the dog's back, Cato did not move. Just let the weight of the hand sit there, warm and certain. Meridian Property Group sent a representative on Monday. His name was Garth, and he arrived at the Sycamore Arms at 10:15 in the morning, an hour after Dolores and Garrison had left for Owen's office. Garth was 48 years old, compact and well-groomed, wearing a dark wool overcoat that was 30 degrees too formal for Drummond Street in November. He had pale blue eyes that moved quickly, and a smile he deployed on a short trigger, a smile that was practiced and present and that had probably been useful in other rooms. He knocked on door 14 and found no response. He tried the door handle. The chain was engaged. A neighbor 2 doors down, a retired electrician named Frank Sauer, who was 71 and did not like being snuck up on, watched all of this from his doorway. "She's not home," Frank said. Garth turned with his quick, prepared smile. "I was just hoping to speak with the resident." "About?" "A matter related to the property." "She's got a lawyer now," Frank said. He said it the way he would have said the pipes are clear or the fuse box checks out. Garth's smile changed slightly at the edges. "I wasn't aware of any legal representation." "Well," Frank said, and went back inside and closed his door. Owen's office occupied the back half of a low building on Harris Street, shared with a tax preparation service and a notary. The walls had bookshelves, and on the bookshelves were hundreds of files, color-coded with paper flags, each one a story that had found its way here by running out of other options. Owen had a paralegal named Ciara who was 26 and fast, and who had the lease pages scanned and filed into a case folder before Dolores had finished her first cup of coffee. Owen laid the situation out carefully and slowly, the way Garrison had seen good officers brief good soldiers, clearly without condescension, making sure the understanding was real before anything was signed. Dolores listened with her hands folded in her lap and her posture straight, the way someone listens when they have been listening carefully their whole life. "They committed a wrongful lockout under the State Residential Landlord-Tenant Act," Owen said. "That statute is clear. You were not in arrears, your lease was current, and they did not serve notice through any of the legally required channels. What they did was illegal on its face." "What does that mean for me?" Dolores asked. She asked it quietly, without drama. "It means we file an emergency motion for a restraining order prohibiting any further interference with your tenancy. It means we simultaneously file a complaint with the State Housing Authority documenting the wrongful lockout. And it means," Owen said, "that we pursue actual damages against Meridian for the breach, which includes any costs you incurred as a result of being locked out, plus the attorney's fees, which under the statute they are liable for." Dolores looked at the desk in front of her. "I can stay in my apartment." "You can stay in your apartment," Owen said. "That's the immediate goal, and we'll have that motion in front of a judge this afternoon." She nodded. She did not cry. She set her hands flat on her knees, the way a person does when they are recalibrating. 19 years, she said, mostly to herself. 19 years, Owen confirmed, is also the reason this case is not complicated. You paid that rent every month. You've been a model tenant. They picked the wrong person to try this with. Cato was in the truck in the parking lot, his head over the door, watching a school bus pull out of a lot across the street. He tracked it with his ears until it disappeared around the corner, then settled his chin on the door edge and watched the street. The restraining order was signed by Judge Miriam Avery at 3:30 that afternoon. Owen called Garrison with the news while Garrison was buying a new door sweep at the hardware store, because Dolores's threshold had a gap that let the cold in, and he had noticed it when he installed the chain. He heard Owen out, said thank you, ended the call, and paid for the door sweep. Cato waited outside the hardware store door, tied to a post, watching the parking lot with professional attentiveness. They were back at the Sycamore Arms by 4. Garrison replaced the door sweep while Dolores sat at the kitchen table and made a list of the money orders she still had receipts for. 19 years sorted by year and month in a manila folder Gerald had labeled in his precise handwriting. Garth came back at 4:45. He knocked. Dolores did not open the door. She stood to the side of it the way Garrison had shown her, and said through the door that any communication from Meridian Property Group should be directed to Owen at the Harris Street Legal Aid office, and that she had a contact number if Garth needed one. There was a pause. "Mrs. Pratt," Garth said through the door. His voice was still calibrated for reassurance, still smooth. "There's been a misunderstanding. Nobody wants to cause any difficulty here." Dolores looked at Garrison. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed and Cato beside him, and he gave her a small nod. "The attorney's name," she said, "is Owen. The number is 514-272-8811. I'd write it down if I were you." Another pause. Then the sound of footsteps going down the hallway, and the exterior door, and Garth's shoes on the concrete steps outside. Garrison looked at Cato. Cato looked at the door. "He'll come back," Garrison said to no one. "Massa, let him," Dolores said, and put the kettle on. He did not come back. What came instead, 2 days later, was a letter from a larger firm in the state capital that had been retained by Meridian Property Group, informing Owen that his client's lease had in fact expired and that the lockout had been performed in good faith under a mistaken belief of vacancy. The letter proposed that the matter be resolved through a mutual release, in which Meridian would not pursue any claims against Dolores, and Dolores would not pursue claims against Meridian, and in which her lease would be renewed at the current market rate for comparable units, which was $640 per month higher than what she currently paid. Owen read this letter aloud at the table in his office. He read it at a measured pace, with a quality of controlled neutrality that Garrison recognized. The neutrality of a person who has encountered something familiar and stupid and is deciding how to respond to it at the register it deserves. "What they're offering," Owen said when he had finished, "is a deal in which they escape accountability for an illegal act in exchange for raising her rent by more than 50%. "No," Dolores said. "No," Owen agreed. He folded the letter and set it aside. "I didn't think so. What this letter also tells me is that they're worried. A firm of that size doesn't draft this kind of correspondence for a case they consider meritless. They're trying to stop discovery." "Discovery of what?" Garrison asked. Owen linked his hands on the desk. "Meridian is not the only property management company operating this model. The way these wrongful lockout schemes tend to work, they're systematic. Same pattern, different addresses, different tenants. The thing that stops them is documentation." He looked at Garrison. "You said Phyllis Odom at the county clerk's office gave you my name?" "She did. Phyllis has been watching Meridian file paperwork through this county for 3 years. She called me herself once, 2 years ago, about another case. There's a reporter at the Harlan County Courier named Selden Parrish who covered that case." Owen picked up his pen. "With your permission, Mrs. Pratt, I'd like to contact Selden." Dolores looked out Owen's window at the bare November trees. "Will it help?" "It might help the next person," Owen said. "It will almost certainly help you, because companies like Meridian generally prefer to resolve quietly when the alternative is a front page." "Contact Selden Parrish," Dolores said. Selden was 63, tall and spare, with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had spent decades learning to ask questions and then actually listen to the answers. He met them at the diner on Maple and 3rd on a Thursday morning, ordered coffee and nothing else, and took notes on a legal pad and handwriting that no one else could have read. He asked Dolores about 19 years of money orders, with a precision that told Garrison he had already spoken with Phyllis Odom. He asked Owen about the wrongful lockout statutes. He asked Garrison, carefully, who he was and why he was here. "I was passing through," Garrison said. Selden looked at Cato under the table. How long ago? About 2 weeks. Selden wrote something down. You read the lease, he said. It was not quite a question. She needed someone to read the lease. Did you find what you expected to find? Garrison thought about it. I found what I was looking for. I wasn't sure I was going to find it. Selden nodded and wrote something else. Hester came by and refilled their coffee without being asked, and asked Dolores how her sister Miriam was doing, and Dolores said the tests had come back better than expected. And Hester said she was glad to hear it, and that she had been keeping them both in her prayers. Hester was 58, red-haired, and ran the diner with a kind of cheerful exactness that made the place feel reliable in the way that good things are reliable, not because of luck, but because of care. Selden looked between Dolores and Hester and then at the room, which at 8 in the morning held 4 other tables of people who all seemed to know each other and who had all, at one point or another, looked at the table where Dolores sat with the acknowledgement people extend to someone who belongs somewhere. The story ran in the Harlan County Courier on a Friday, 2 weeks after Garrison had first seen Dolores on that hallway bench. It was on the front page, below the fold, and it was reported with the careful factual density of someone who understood that the most effective indictment of a bad actor is a complete, accurate accounting of what they actually did. Selden named Meridian Property Group. He named the wrongful lockout statute. He quoted Owen's description of the pattern. He quoted Dolores, who said, in the sentence that ran at the top of the article, just under the headline, that she had paid her rent on time for 19 years, and she intended to do so for as long as she was able. Garrison read the article at Doyle's kitchen table on Saturday morning while Cato ate from his bowl by the door. He folded it when he was done and set it beside his coffee. Front page, Doyle said from across the table. Below the fold, Garrison said. Still front page. The State Housing Authority opened an inquiry into Meridian Property Group 10 days after the article ran. Owen sent Garrison the notification by text message at 7 in the morning. Garrison was in the parking lot of a gas station off the county road, drinking bad coffee from a paper cup and watching the sun come up over the eastern ridge in thin bands of copper and gray. He looked at the message for a while. Then he looked at Cato, who was standing at the edge of the parking lot, looking at the ridge with the same quality of attention he gave to things he had decided were important. Meridian Property Group did not contest the restraining order at the hearing. Their attorneys were present, polite, and said very little. Judge Avery reaffirmed the order, added a provision prohibiting any rent increase during the pendency of the Housing Authority inquiry, and noted on the record that wrongful lockouts were not errors of paperwork but deliberate acts with deliberate consequences. She said this quietly, without theater, looking at Meridian's attorneys the way a judge looks at people who have misspent everyone's time. Dolores sat straight through the entire proceeding and thanked Owen afterward with a handshake and a tin of shortbread cookies she had baked the previous afternoon. Owen accepted the cookies with the gravity they deserved. Garrison drove Dolores home from the courthouse. She sat in the passenger seat of Doyle's truck with her good coat folded across her lap and her hands still and her eyes on the road. Cato was in the back seat, head between the 2 front seats, and at some point during the drive, Dolores put her hand on top of his head, not looking at him, just resting her hand there the way you rest a hand on something steady. How long will the inquiry take? She asked. Owen said it could be months. The lockout itself is settled. And the rent? Stays as it is, until the inquiry concludes. Maybe longer, depending on what they find. Dolores looked out the window at Drummond Street, coming up on the right. The Sycamore Arms was mid-block, a 4-story brick building with a green awning the color of old money and a concrete stoop that needed repointing and a little ornamental iron fence in front that someone had loved once and that could be loved again with a wire brush and some paint. Gerald would have been furious, she said. It sounds like he would have been right to be. He was a methodical man. She watched the building as they pulled up. He would have known what to do. He always knew what to do with paperwork. You did, Garrison said. You kept everything. She looked at him, and for the first time since he had met her, something in the careful composure shifted, just slightly, just at the edges. Not enough to call grief. Something older than grief. Something that had been carried so long it no longer needed a name. I kept it, because Gerald told me to, she said. 19 years ago, he sat me down and said, Dolores, if anything ever happens to this building, if they ever come after this building, you will need the paperwork. He didn't know what kind of trouble. He just knew the kind of world we live in. Garrison sat with that. Then he said, he was a good man. He was the best man I ever knew, Dolores said. Second best now. She got out of the truck before he could decide what to do with that. Cato vaulted over the seat back and followed her to the door and sat on the stoop while she found her key, the new key that the building's locksmith had cut under the terms of the restraining order, and let herself in. Frank Sauer was coming down the stairs as she entered, wearing his coat and carrying a bag of groceries he had clearly just brought up. He stopped on the third step and looked at her. How'd it go? He asked. Fine, Dolores said. It went fine. Frank nodded. He looked past her at Garrison in the doorway and at Cato at Garrison's heel. You did good, Frank said to Garrison, with the spare directness of a man who did not give that kind of sentence away easily. Garrison nodded back. Cato sat down. It was a Tuesday in late November when Garrison finally had the conversation with himself that he had been avoiding since before the truck was fixed. He was sitting on the tailgate of Doyle's truck in Doyle's Drive, in the dark and the cold, with Cato beside him and the sky absolutely clear above the ridge and the stars as thick as he ever remembered seeing them. Doyle's kitchen light was on. There was a smell of wood smoke from somewhere down the road. He had the specific feeling he recognized from other times, other places. The feeling of having arrived somewhere and put down weight and not picked it back up again. It was a feeling he had spent years moving through before it could take hold, because in his experience it was a feeling that led to staying, and staying led to being counted on. And being counted on meant that when you eventually left, which you always did, you had taken something with you that did not belong to you. Cato leaned against his leg. Garrison looked down at him. Cato was looking at the kitchen light the way he looked at things he had decided were good. There was a rental unit on the far end of Drummond Street, 2 blocks from the Sycamore Arms, a small house with a detached garage and a yard that had been let go but could be reclaimed with a few weekends of work. The landlord was a woman named Bevy Marsh, who was 74, and who had fixed the gutters herself the previous fall, and who had watched the Courier article carefully and mentioned to Hester at the diner that she hoped they locked those Meridian people up, which was a sentiment Garrison had heard from several people in Harlan County in the past few weeks. He had asked about the rental in passing 3 days ago, framing it as idle curiosity. Bevy Marsh had said the rent was fair and had asked if he had a dog. He had said yes. She had said good, she liked dogs, and a man with a dog took care of a yard. He sat on the tailgate a long time. The wood smoke smell drifted and thinned, and the stars turned slowly the way they do when you are outside long enough to notice them moving. Doyle had not asked him again about the truck. Doyle was a man who understood that some things needed to work themselves out in their own time, and that the worst thing you could do was put a clock on them. Garrison put his hand on Cato's back. Cato exhaled, a long, slow breath, and put his chin on Garrison's knee. "All right," Garrison said very quietly. Cato's tail moved once. He called Bevy in the morning. The hearing on actual damages was scheduled for the spring, and Owen was confident. The Housing Authority inquiry had expanded to include 2 other properties managed by Meridian in the state, and a third in a neighboring state had been flagged by a tenant advocate group. Selden had written 2 follow-up pieces, the second of which had been picked up by the state newspaper and run on their housing page. The company's attorneys had stopped attending hearings in person and had sent junior associates instead, which Owen said was a reliable sign. Dolores had a new key. The lock on door 14 was now one she had chosen herself, installed by a locksmith she had hired on the recommendation of Frank. The chain she had put on that first night was still there, augmented now by a second sliding bolt that Garrison had installed on a Tuesday afternoon, while Dolores made soup on the stove and told him about the winter Gerald had built the shelving in the second bedroom out of reclaimed wood from a furniture shop that was closing, and how she could still smell the cedar sometimes in the mornings when the light came through the window at the right angle. She told him about the neighborhood as it had been and as it was now, about the families who had moved in and moved on and the ones who had stayed. She told him about Howard Kessel, who had fixed her radiator 3 times in a single winter without charging her for labor, and who had left the building in the hands of whoever would buy it because he had no children and had trusted the wrong lawyers. Garrison listened and worked. Cato lay on the kitchen floor and monitored the soup. On the first Saturday of December, Dolores hosted what she called a small gathering, which turned out to mean 11 people in her apartment, which was warm and smelled of the shortbread she had made again, and of the lavender sachets and of coffee and of a winter that was holding off, just barely, while the people who lived through it got a few more weeks of something almost like ordinary. Frank came. Hester from the diner came with her husband Jim. Phyllis Odom came with her daughter, who was visiting from out of town. Owen came and drank 1 cup of coffee and ate 2 pieces of shortbread and spoke to Dolores for a long time near the window, their voices low and easy. Doyle came and stood in the corner and ate soup and said almost nothing, which for Doyle was a form of contentment. Garrison sat in the chair near the bookshelf, the one that had the view of the street, and watched Harlan County gathered in Dolores's living room around the things she had loved long enough that they held the shape of her life. Cato moved among them. He accepted a scratch from Phyllis's daughter and a piece of shortbread from Hester, which he took so gently from her palm that she laughed and looked at Garrison and said, "He's wonderful." He went to Dolores at the kitchen counter and sat beside her while she poured coffee, close enough that his shoulder was at her knee and she rested one hand on his head, the way she had rested her hand on him in the truck, with the ease of someone who no longer needed to think about it. The streetlight outside came on at 4:30, amber against the early winter dark. Through the window, Garrison could see the Sycamore Arms across the street, and a few doors down, its green awning, its concrete stoop, the little iron fence. 3 windows on the second floor were lit from inside, the warm yellow of lamps in rooms where people were home. He thought of Gerald Pratt, who had sat his wife down 19 years ago and told her to keep everything, who had understood, without knowing the specific shape of it, that the world required documentation from people who could not afford to lose. He thought about that. Dolores came and sat in the chair across from him, a cup of tea in her hands, and looked at him with the eyes of someone who had been reading people for 82 years and had gotten very good at it. "You called Bevy," she said. It was not a question. She's got a small house on the far end of the street, Garrison said. I know it. Gerald and I used to walk past it. She looked at her tea. There's a yard. Needs work. You're good at work. He looked at the window, at the amber streetlight, at the lit windows of the Sycamore Arms. I don't usually stay, he said. I know, Dolores said. I could tell that about you. First time I saw you, I thought, here is someone who has been leaving for a long time. He looked at her. But then you sat down with my lease, she said, and you read every page. Garrison stayed in Harlan County. He moved into the small house on the far end of Drummond Street on the second Saturday of December, with 2 bags and a dog and the tools he kept in the back of Doyle's truck, which Doyle said he could keep for as long as he needed them. The yard was worse than he had thought and better than he had feared, and by the 3rd week of January he had the fence repaired and the walk cleared and a pile of storm-felled wood split and stacked beside the garage. He walked Cato down Drummond Street most mornings, past the Sycamore Arms, past the green awning and the concrete stoop, past Frank, who sometimes stood in his doorway drinking coffee and nodded at them the way men nod at things that have turned out as they should. He stopped at Hester's most mornings for coffee and sometimes stayed for the eggs. Cato lay under the table and received with dignified patience whatever Hester felt moved to bring him, which was usually something left over from the breakfast service, and was always offered with the assurance that it was no bother. On Tuesday evenings, he drove Dolores to the legal aid office for the progress meetings on her case. He sat in the hallway while she met with Owen and read whatever was at hand. And when she came out, he drove her home and walked her to the door and said good night. On the Tuesday before Christmas, she pressed a small wrapped package into his hands at the door. Inside was a folded piece of paper. He opened it standing in the hallway. It was a letter, written in Gerald Pratt's precise handwriting, dated 15 years ago, addressed to no one in particular. It said, in the plain and careful way of a man who chose his words because he meant to keep them, that he wanted whoever lived in this apartment after them to know that he and Dolores had been happy here, genuinely happy, and that the walls held that, and that he hoped whoever came after found the same. Garrison stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he folded the letter, put it in his jacket pocket, and walked home through the December cold with Cato at his heel, and the streetlights burning amber on Drummond Street, and the windows of the Sycamore Arms lit warm against the dark. There are people in this world who keep everything, who build gray file boxes and label them clearly, and trust that the day will come when the paperwork will matter. Most of the time, the day never comes. Most of the time, the world treats their care as excess, as the harmless habit of the overly cautious. Then sometimes a door gets changed while someone is away at her sister's, and a man with cold eyes and a good coat shows up and calls it a misunderstanding, and the only thing standing between a person and the loss of 19 years is the gray box on the top shelf under the blue and white quilt. That is not luck. That is foresight. That is love. Made practical, made durable, made to last past the person who first insisted on it. Gerald Pratt was right. The paperwork matters. The people who read it matter, and the ones who stop to read it, who sit down at a kitchen table with tea going cold beside them and read 31 pages because it might matter to someone. Those people matter more than they know. If you have someone like that in your life, hold on to them. And if you have never been that person for someone, consider that you still could be. May God bless you and keep you and the people you love. May the locked doors in your life find their keys, and may you always have, somewhere close, something worth staying for.